Welcome to today's webinar on building a marketing analytics solution in-house. Our speaker is Niall Oulton, who joined PyMC-Labs as our Director of Marketing Analytics a couple of months ago. And what I always found fascinating is that for us at PyMC-Labs, marketing analytics was a bit of a surprise hit. When we started Labs about 3 years ago, we were very happy to see that marketing was really embracing Bayesian modeling. And I'm actually curious here to hear from you, Niall, where you almost took the opposite direction from us, where we started as Bayesians and then learned about marketing analytics. You started in the marketing analytics space and then discovered Bayesian modeling. So I'm really curious to hear what your journey was and why you found Bayesian modeling compelling.
Yeah, sure. So I traditionally came from a pure econometrics background at university. So it's quite funny, Bayesian methods isn't really taught at British universities, or it certainly wasn't about 8 years ago. I think there was one optional module that was about 4 weeks long, and even then it was quite brief. So very much came from a traditional econometrics background, and a natural feeder into that is generally econometrics in marketing analytics. So my own journey was working agency side mostly, across many different industries, and then some experience client side as well. So got definitely experience working across quite a few different industries and clients. And then I think there was a shift. There was a few. It's quite funny. We talked about this brief moments ago, but essentially there was a big shift or slow shift towards Bayesian methods in marketing. I think the Google paper was potentially the first thing, but there wasn't really much out there in 2017 in terms of being able to do it. A lot of people's systems were in Python, so transitioning to Python was that first key thing. And I came across personally the blog post by HelloFresh, and I think that was quite a natural first entrance into it. So if you search Bayesian MMM 3 years ago, there's pretty much the only thing that really came up. There was a couple of other things on there, and that's really what sparked my fancy into Bayesian methods. And then from there, really wanted to get a grasp of the actual science as a whole. So bought a book by Ben Lambert. I don't know if he's a well-known in this webinar, but Ben Lambert really has a great book on the overall methods, and then looked at applying that back to marketing analytics. So really started to get to grips with it on different clients. And one of the key benefits I see of it, and is the concept of uncertainty and what that kind of brings about for clients in decision making. So there is the probably slight pessimistic view. It's subjective, but fundamentally all modeling is subjective. But really being able to tell clients that how certain you can be in your decisions is really key. And I thought that is one of the key benefits to it in marketing analytics.
Yeah, really cool to hear that the HelloFresh blog post that we put out a couple years ago by now was helpful there. I posted in the chat. People are interested. So one thing that I always found very fascinating about marketing analytics is that it's really a space that's changing very rapidly. So one of the big trends is certainly, and this has been underway, I guess, for a couple of years now, is from multi-touch attribution, where you can track individual customers all the way through your funnel, more towards these marketing mix models, MMMs, that really only take the ad spend and sales into account. So I was curious if you could speak to what is underlying that trend.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ongoing cyclical trend between attribution and MMMs. So I think attribution might have even come first, where literally just sending out notes and people would send back how they'd bought something like way before computers even started. And then sort of marketing mix models came around in the 70s, so that became more popular. And then the influx of data and cookies and being able to track consumers in quite near time of where they'd come through was quite lucrative and gave quite a lot of insight to specifically performance marketing channels. They've always not been the best, because fundamentally you would only be able to see where someone had sort of initiated maybe a week or 2 weeks prior at most. So they've always kind of had their downsides, but have generally been quite cheap and easy to set up and use. But generally speaking, I think within the market now, with the iOS update and cookies, I mean, everyone's kind of seen probably tens of hundreds of blog posts on the depreciation of the cookie and the impacts on the industry. So we don't go into too much detail, but I think really the way I see it is it's becoming the more mainstream solution to give a holistic picture of your marketing performance. And I think it's generally better anyway, because it gives a better flex between performance marketing and brand marketing. It's still not quite perfect, and there are improvements, and we're working on some cool stuff at PyMC-Labs on that, but I think it gives a bit more holistic view than attribution does.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I guess we already talked a little bit about the Bayesian trend, and the other big trend, of course, that we've particularly seen at PyMC-Labs also is that a lot of our customers really want to move towards in-housing a lot of the marketing analytics. And what that, of course, brings us to the main topic of today's webinar. And Niall has some slides in that's going to do a quick presentation to really highlight that, and I guess the solutions that we came up with and that are out there in terms of using open source technology. So really curious to hear about. And for the attendees, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature, and then we'll get to it after the presentation, and can include that in our discussion. So with that, yeah, I'll take it away.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so just to give a brief overview of the agenda of what I'm going to walk through today. I'm not going to go too much into it, but what is marketing effectiveness on a very top line level? Thomas already links like blogs and other webinars to go into a bit more detail, but I think it's always handy to give, just for anyone who's not quite so familiar, just a brief overview, and maybe they come across this video first, and it'll be always good to link to those other stuff. So the second thing is, why is it important? So it's kind of easy to know what it is, but why should clients really be measuring the impact of marketing and what it can really do for them? The next sort of concept is kind of looking at the different options. So, as I mentioned before, I was agency side for a long time. So there is the potential to outsource to agencies, which brings about its benefits. There's definitely upsides to doing it, but there's obviously also cons to that. And then also looking at in-housing and the relevant pros and cons. And then kind of moving into a bit more detail of what I kind of call the marketing effectiveness workflow. So people on here might be familiar with the Bayesian workflow. It's kind of looking at that sort of process, but on a full concept of looking at your marketing effectiveness and how you measure your marketing. And I think that's really important, because I think conceptually clients might think it could be quite easy. You just build a model using open source software, and you throw in data, you get outputs, and that's it in-house. And it's a lot more involved than that. However, it's not to say it's not possible. So more of an in-depth overview on that, and then finally an overview into the different solutions that can help within that workflow. So I guess what is marketing effectiveness? And I kind of thought of a very simple one-liner. It is essentially determining the success of your marketing channels and campaigns. And what is success? It's really important that clients define that success in a unified way. So make sure the business are aligned in what they define as that success. So is it sales? Is it awareness? Is it new customers, and so forth? But essentially, how does marketing deliver towards those different KPIs? On top of that, using that measured impact, how can you then make data-driven decisions on your marketing? Within that, there's three core approaches, and we've touched on that briefly, but essentially there's attribution. This is becoming less favorable at the moment, but it's certainly still out there. experiments, so running different A/B tests, uplift tests. I think this is generally probably the gold standard, but is less practical from a overall measurement strategy. So, you can only do one channel at a time. It can be a bit tricky, and it also kind of interferes with your whole approach to marketing itself. And then, finally, marketing mix models. As I said, we have a webinar on that. So if you want to look at more detail, refer to that webinar, and there's a great in-depth webinar on that. Why measure it? So there's a few surveys or studies out there I came across from Newstar. It's a little bit old now. It's from 2019, but essentially what it does is it's a survey of 800 CMOs of whether they have a marketing effectiveness analytics program or not, and then begins to tease out how successful they are in their own performance and growth. So, what they found is that essentially companies which had a dedicated in-house team, but then also I think this is quite key, is also trusting the insights from the models to actually make decisions. And finally I think this one could be very industry or client dependent, but they found from a benchmark that you should spend about 10% on media budget on analytics. I think this can vary depending on the size of your business, size of the market. So, obviously, if it's definitely a cost benefit analysis sort of scenario. So, if you're spending only 100,000 total on media, it doesn't really make sense to spend 50,000 on measurement, because do you expect that measurement to deliver more than 50,000 in sales growth? So, I think each individual client has to have a sort of long, hard think of the cost benefits to it, and make a decision on what is that worthwhile investment and what it could bring to the business. But that's pretty common in how a business will operate in all different parts of the business, making those sort of decisions. So I think that segues into nicely of what are the different options for evaluating your marketing performance. So one obvious and simple one is outsource to an external company. There's probably hundreds of agencies which can do measurement and marketing and probably do it quite well, and these can bring about some significant benefits to you as a client. So, one really big thing is expertise. I've worked agency side for 8-9 years, so worked across many different models, many different industries. These companies might have been running for a long time, and fundamentally what you get from that is a big, broad depth of experience across a lot of different models and industries, and anything which happens in the industry have like cross learning. So, if something's happening in one model due to COVID, you can kind of get those learnings and transition it to another model. So it is quite beneficial in that sense. I think the second point has been significant, but is reducing now in terms of importance. So historically, access to licenses or tools, or building your own in-house solutions would be very, very expensive. Basically, you had to either do it from scratch or buy quite an expensive off-the-shelf tool, which generally would give a one-size-fits-all model. Now, an agency will already have that in place, but as I say, I think this is becoming less of a pro due to open source software. The third one is probably the most significant for outsourcing, particularly if it's a agency which is separate to any sort of media agency. So, essentially it is generally regarded as marking your own homework. So what people like to see is an impartial view of measuring marketing performance. And if you outsource to an external agency which has no viewpoint on this, they've got no skin in the game, you'll generally get an unbiased opinion or unbiased model entirely on channel performance. In terms of the cons, though, it doesn't seem like it could be, but it could be a significant financial commitment. So the first year might be relatively low cost, but then generally speaking, you'll want to stick with the same vendor without shopping around. It's probably a bad idea to chop and change each year just for consistency purposes, familiarity with your business and so forth. And this can become quite a big financial commitment over the years, particularly if you get stuck with vendor lock-in. So that can be quite a big downside to basically outsourcing to an agency. And, with that becomes reduced autonomy. So, you have much more reliance on an external provider to deliver this work for you. And, they've got to ensure that they're delivering it in time of your planning cycle. So do you have trust in that work to be delivered on time? And then the third con is probably the biggest, is transparency. So outsourcing to an agency will pretty much be black box. You won't really know how the model is built. The clients will have IP of different ways of building a model. So essentially, you generally have to have a lot of trust in how that model has been built. You might get some little insights or little snippets into how it's been done, but fundamentally, you'll have very little understanding on how it's been done, why decisions have been made, or so forth. So I think that can be quite a significant one for the cons. The complete alternative, I guess, is to bring in-house. So one of the biggest pros of in-house solutions is essentially bringing in marketing analytics in-house. Is you build the model yourself entirely. So you're building a very bespoke model to problem. So you can have a fully customized model relevant to your business, and we've done that at PyMC-Labs for many different clients, and for them it's very, very useful. On top of that is the domain understanding. So someone working client side will always have a better understanding of their business than any agency. An agency might have general good industry knowledge, but they won't have that key insights into the decision making that your business is making. And what's kind of linked into that is the responsiveness to changes. So if a competitor has made a change, or you've made a change, you know when that's happened, and when that might have happened to the model. So you could be more responsive in decision making and building those models. And then one of the big things is just cost savings. It definitely has a bigger upfront investment. Essentially, especially if you're building a bespoke model and hiring and training staff. But over time, a very efficient, well-oiled in-house solution will be more cost effective than going with an agency. That being said, the cons to it is, as I say, quite difficult to resource. It can be quite a specialized skill to build econometric models, especially Bayesian models. I think we're seeing changes in the industry with that because of more flexible and hybrid working. I think AI is going to have a big impact on the building of models in the next few years as well. So I think the issue of resource will change, and fundamentally you can also have the options to have external people train and hire people for you, and who can be adept in the specialized skills. The other sort of key negative, though, is of in-housing is you become very specialized at one specific model. You don't have that expertise of many different models, so you just become very good at building one model, and that can be fine. But if the business changes for whatever reason, or there is a significant change to the economy that is influencing the model, not having that expertise can be quite a big drain. The other sort of potential issue that you kind of want to look out for in-housing is bias. So it can be a lot easier to see how internal politics, whether conscious or unconscious, could lead to rogue decision making in building a model, so favoring one channel over another or misreporting on different channels. So yeah, that's definitely a few things to look out for when in housing. So I think one thing I wanted to go through more detail is what I regard as like the marketing effectiveness workflow. It isn't just as simple as getting an open source package and building a model and then you're done. It has to be a very well thought out process, and fundamentally how this workflow is relevant to your business depends on whether you should probably in-house or outsource. So one key thing is the data, understanding the data. What data do you need to build that model? How does that data work in terms of the getting transforming into your sales? So that's one quite important thing. And then finally, how do you actually build a model? What type of model do you need that's relevant for your business? And then the insights. What are you going to do with the insights? And then you will have feedback loops. One is the feedback loop into the data to make sure your model's correct. And then another aspect is the feedback into the process and starting the process again. And again, different businesses will have different frequencies where they would like to update the model. So essentially marketing, you'll have different planning cycles. How often is that planning cycle? Does that planning cycle vary by country? And a lot of different things to consider. So if you're only really looking for one update per year, it might not be as relevant to in-house. But if you're looking for a well-oiled, ongoing, fast feedback loop, it can be quicker and probably more beneficial to consider it in-house. So I kind of wanted to break down further into what those different components are and how I kind of think about those different components to the workflow. And one key thing that I always like to focus on when thinking about marketing effectiveness is start with the end in mind. So, what are you really trying to achieve? It can be quite simple to obtain data, build a model, and then come up with some outputs, but it doesn't really fit into what you need. So really thinking about what you're going to get from your model, and then starting then from the start of what data do you need to do that with, what model do you need to achieve that with. So always think about the end in mind. Another key thing is, who are the stakeholders? Are the stakeholders aligned in what I refined as business success at the start? So essentially one key thing is to make sure that all your stakeholders are aligned in what they define as successes. So if you're going to build a model to make decisions from, everyone has to be aligned on those components. I think, and then another thing that I think is really key to get from an in-house model is, or just a model itself, is understanding the why. It's very simple to get the what from a model. So what is happening to my media? What is my ROI? What is my response curve for that channel? But fundamentally, if you don't understand the why, it's not really going to be that useful to you, because you want to use the models to make decisions. So without understanding those components, it could be a bit of a pointless task to engage in it. And then finally, this seems a bit obvious, but is it actionable? Can you actually action on what the model is delivering? So fundamentally, is it worthwhile building a hyper regional model, very low granularity, if you only ever plan and buy at a national level? It might seem really useful and insightful to sort of build a model at different great granularities, but fundamentally, if you don't plan at that level, there is no point to expense in such an expensive model. So that's one of the key things to focus. So data. What data do you need? Consider the industry specifics. So are you working in CPG? Do you need things like price, promotion, distribution, and really understanding all the different data you need to collect to build a robust model? Because essentially, if you don't have the right data in place, the model won't really be any good. And then the second really big thing, and this can probably happen quite a lot, is just tracking the data. Bayesian marketing mix models are beneficial in the sense that they can be more robust with shorter time series, but fundamentally, you probably still want at least 1 to 2 years minimum. So part of the journey to in-housing could quite simply just be tracking the data and collating it and having it nicely organized. And then once you've got it in that place, you can kind of begin on that journey. And then another one is external data sources. So you'll have a lot of internal data that you can obtain and track. Is there anything external to your business that would be relevant to start tracking? So weather data, economic data, lots of different fundamentals in that. And then in the modeling, so I think one key thing to understand in it's probably a little bit of a technical term, but understanding the data generating process. And essentially what the data generating process is a bit abstract, but essentially it's fundamentally the building blocks of how does the going from data explain and go towards your sales data. So understanding the data generating process can help you understand the key and core components to the model. And I think that's a really key part. Identify the appropriate model itself. So depending on your industry or what your depth var looks like will necessitate a different model. And this is really where having a bespoke model can come in handy. So a one size fits all model might not be relevant for your business and might struggle to really obtain the insights that you need. So what type of model do you need? What transformations do you need to make to that model to get to that output? And then quite simply test, evaluate, retrain the model. This kind of goes into the feedback loop. Is your model robust enough to obtain the data-driven insights that we discussed at the very start? So, fundamentally, the business has to have full trust of the in-house model to make decisions from it, and that has to go from the data scientists all the way to the CMOs. So, if you haven't got a robust and trusted model, your framework might fall down on that as well. Cool. So, I think one of the key things, and that is sort of made in-housing a lot more a much more easier option for clients, is the option of cheap software or free to use software. So open source software is just PyMC has been sort of transitioning that already. But then also what we're now seeing is with open source software in PyMC-Marketing, where it's actually very specific to market mix models, it can be that core component that you can build around. And essentially with this, it is quite cost effective because it doesn't require a expensive license around it. The other key benefit to it is fully transparent. So you know exactly how everything is working, and the other key thing is anyone can add to it. So whether you have your own sort of transformations or model that you want to put in, that can also be done. So I think open source software as PyMC-Marketing is really going to help transition towards in-housing. And one of the big things that we've seen this in is Bolt. So Bolt recently did a blog post, so you can see the title there, and we'll put the link in the chat or in the description after. But essentially, Bolt are using PyMC-Marketing in their core in-house model. So essentially, they're using it in combination with any uplift or experiments they're doing to refine and come up with a unified model to explain their effectiveness of their marketing. And then what they're then using is the outputs from it to help make data-driven decisions. So, Bolt is a really great success story of using open source software off the shelf, integrating your own sort of niche needs to it, and having a really robust model and framework to make decisions from. Cool. I kind of wanted to go into how we can kind of help. So I've spoken quite at length at the different components, the different data requirements, the models. Obviously, PyMC-Marketing is quite nice because it's off the shelf. But what we can help is in understanding what data you need, if there is any bespoke requirement. So, an off-the-shelf open source tool might not be relevant for everyone. And whilst it could be a really good core to build around, you might also want to have some niche aspects in there. So we can obviously help build that. And then, the other big component to in-housing is ensuring that everyone has the right necessary skills to do that. So we run workshops and running an SLA to help people essentially on that journey to in-housing. So fundamentally we can help out in all the different components of the in-housing workflow. The other thing that I kind of want to give a quick overview or insight into is, if open source software or hiring Python coders isn't quite for you, we do also have a sneak peek at some in-house software that is currently in process of being built. So we've just got a very quick demo on how this works. It uses PyMC in the back end, has options for different transformations, including different trends, moving bases, seasonality. You can run many models and test them at the same time and upload them. And it gives you all the different aspects such as coefficients, time varying parameters and different price and so on. So, if you're not as quite comfortable in open source software, this is also a potential option, and we're more than happy to do a private demo. We've got a book a call link, so you can do private demos for anyone that would like to. Cool. And then I think that's it. I don't know if you want to open up for Q&A, Thomas.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks so much. That was really interesting and sort of a really comprehensive overview. I don't think I've seen that anywhere else where people could really sort of learn about all the ins and outs of that. One question from Gautam is, how do we derive value of the MMM analytics piece? Do we have some good practices in the industry? Goes on. Currently, we are facing a challenge where we have to build a team of around 10 people consisting of business analysts, data engineers, data scientists, and consultants. Though we are successful in the delivery of the insights, we are facing a challenge with our business stakeholders to commit to value delivery from the MMM exercise. This is the place where we are challenged to justify the operational expense we are bearing currently for building an in-house team of 10 people, which is a really relevant, good question. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's quite a sizable team as well. So it's definitely I can understand why you'd want to justify that expense. I think one key thing, and agencies do that. Use these insights in terms of they will look at how much the media is currently delivering in terms of ROAS and revenue or any different objective. These come with response curves, and fundamentally you'll use these response curves in with what is realistic from a media planning perspective to deliver a more mathematical optimized point. So that inherently will come with a better revenue perspective in terms of what it's delivering. So you can quite clearly use those optimizations to give a indication of what your team's delivering. On top of that, I guess one interesting piece would be just more looking at a more causal lens of doing your own effectiveness. Were you hitting targets? Were you consistently hitting targets? Are you now consistently hitting targets? Now you have something in place. And that's the other thing. And essentially, if you have something in place and you're hitting targets, then it kind of becomes a justifiable reason anyway, because you'd be a bit strange to change something if you're hitting your targets every time, and then all of a sudden you make a big change to take something away. You run the risk of failing in the future potentially.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I would also say that like the more open source technology you're using, the less of a burden there is in terms of like data scientists and data engineers. And specifically on the data engineering side, so this is something that we're currently working on for PyMC-Marketing, which is adding more capabilities to deploy these models in production. So in terms of tutorials, how do you run this on AWS or GCP, and how do you save models and then load them later, or place them in the Docker container. So that is something that is actively underway, and we're pretty excited about the progress that we made. So thanks for the question, Gautam. I hope that's really useful. Shekhar has a question. Can we build hierarchical models using PyMC-Marketing? Maybe I'll. So we have worked a lot with hierarchical models in general at Labs, but particularly how it relates to MMMs, and they make a big difference. Currently, I don't think that's in there, but it's definitely on our wish list, and we'll add that soon. There is some resources on that. For example, I just posted a talk that I gave at PyData London in 2022, where we talk about the work that we did with HelloFresh. There's also that blog post that I posted, which talks about not only making it hierarchical, but also having time varying parameters in there, which also we found to make a big difference. And it's kind of logical that if you, for example, fit your model over a 2-year period, right, the model assumes that your channel effectiveness is constant over those 2 years. And we definitely know that that's not the case. Like obviously during COVID, the channel effectivenesses were completely thrown out of whack. And having a time varying parameter instead that allows to capture these changes is really powerful, and that was reflected in the model accuracy in a strong way. So these are all things that are like in various stages of development, bringing them into the open source tool. But certainly if you want to move faster than that, we're also more than happy to chat about helping build that in-house solution that has those more advanced capabilities. So that's something that we've definitely done.
Yeah. I think the other thing is to kind of look at is a hierarchical model even necessary for your business? So if you plan media nationally, what good is a regional insight on something if you can't change that planning? So kind of linking back to that, it can not always be the most smartest thing to sort of invest in. But again, that depends entirely on the business.
Yeah. Sheikh, another question. Can we use NumPy and Blackjack samplers in PyMC-Marketing? And can we run on GPU, provided PyMC can do that now? So yes, we have made a lot of progress on these different backends for PyMC. So PyMC is based on the library called PyTensor, which is essentially taking all the compute graph of the model and then compiling that to different backends. And traditionally that has been just compile that model to C and then compile that and run that machine speed. But also more recently, even though it's been a couple of years by now, we have a JAX backend and a number backend. And that they both are quite performant, usually much more performant than the C backend. JAX seems to be the most popular, and I guess it's a little bit more wider established and tested. And where it gets really interesting is that, of course, you can not only run the model in JAX, but you can also then combine that with sampler in JAX. And there's two implementations that are really good of the NUT sampler. One is provided by NumPyro and one is provided by Blackjax. And both of those you can use in PyMC, and both of those you can use in PyMC-Marketing. So I think that's just a flag when you call like model.fit, you can pass NUT sampler equals NumPyro on Blackjax, and then it'll use that. Or maybe it's a little bit different parameter, I have to look it up. And also you can run it on the GPU. So that would happen on the jack side of things, where you basically set your device to either GPU, and then it'll just natively sample on the GPU. And this is something that we've done many times at labs in various projects, usually for models that are a little bit beefier than MMMs, even though MMMs can get quite beefy, especially if you're considering these time-varying processes and hierarchies, or like a lot of regional effects, and you can go arbitrarily complex on almost any model. And that's where those things really start to matter, and also where GPU kind of things make a much bigger difference, and sometimes in our cases made a model even possible to sample in the first place. Like CPU would just be very slow. So yeah, that's totally possible, and we do that, and it's also supported directly in the package. Anything you want to add to that?
No problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in your mind, is scalability like an issue usually you see for MMMs, or for the most part they just
generally speak, I mean, it depends on how fast you need the model, and what you're kind of used to. So I think a lot of people have gone from probably quite basic OLS models, which will take a second to fit, but they don't really deliver much in terms of insights, and transition to something which takes 5 minutes, whilst it's only 5 minutes, seems insane to them. But I think fundamentally waiting that sort of length of time makes it is worthwhile, given the insights it does deliver. I've generally not seen too much issues with scalability that can't be solved with some mathematical solution or some other solution to tweak the model and really improve it, is generally what I've seen.
Yeah, so that is actually a really good point. So oftentimes clients would come to us and be like, oh, our model is slow. What type of samplers can we use to like make it faster? And almost always that's the wrong answer, at least at first, because most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, if the model is slow, it's not because the tech stack behind it is slow, but it's because the model is poorly parameterized. Might be underspecified, might be overspecified, and it might have suboptimal priors and or highly correlated posteriors. And while these modern samplers like Hamiltonian Monte Carlo nuts are much better at these problems, they're still not magic. So a lot of the work that we do oftentimes is taking a model and then reparameterizing it to where it goes from, for example, 30 minutes or sometimes even hours to like 2 minutes without changing any of that jack stuff or anything, just like the same model, just written a little bit differently can make a huge difference. And that's often where the first attempt should be made, because it's not only a problem of speed, it's also a problem of correctness and convergence. So if the model is slow, oftentimes the convergence will suffer, and maybe you don't even see that. So the R hat and convergence statistics might actually tell you something really good, but nonetheless, if you like once you have that model and it samples fast, then you actually see that the answers you're getting are kind of different and it was biased before. So that's definitely something to be aware of.
I think this stems back to kind of what I was talking about with the actual measurement workflow. And I've seen one extreme case of data transformation of literally, instead of the mean of a variable, scaling it slightly differently, made a change from 30 minutes to literally 2 minutes. And that was just of one variable. So that's why, you know, the whole workflow is really important to follow, because you could be talking half an hour for one model. If you're running 5 models, that could be, you can really get up to quite significant times just by not quite following a structured workflow. So I think that's quite important to kind of take out and follow from that.
Yeah. And I also just posted a blog post from PyMC-Labs on the work where we, with HelloFresh, like that was the first thing. So they actually had a model already, and they had this PyMC-Con talk in 2020 that like by far been the most successful of that conference. And so they were quite sophisticated and had a cool model. And that was exactly that story where they were like, yeah, it takes 30 minutes. And then we took it and brought it down to 2 minutes. So that blog post, which is called Improving the Speed and Accuracy Bayesian Media Mix Models, that talks about that journey and sort of these types of tricks you can apply. So one thing that I'd be curious about is how you see the field progressing. Like, I mean, obviously we talked about in-housing, but like, let's look a bit further, like in terms of the analytics and getting deeper insights, getting the most out of the data. What do you think are promising directions for the future, even though they might not be totally clear yet?
I think one of the key things that we haven't seen is Bayesian decision making. So yeah, we see it in a lot of different other industries with Bayesian models that isn't in marketing. And I think that's going to be quite a significant move. So fundamentally, taking that entire risk profile of what your return of investment is from different marketing channels, taking that uncertainty and essentially building a model that can make decisions that encompass the full risk. And yeah, we've not really seen too much of that yet. There's probably quite a lot of good reasons to that, because fundamentally the optimizers were probably quite expensive that people have invested in. So transitioning to a Bayesian model is probably the first step, and still just using the coefficients in an optimizer would be that first natural step. I think then using the posteriors and Bayesian decision modeling decision making is going to be the key next step in the industry, and that's probably where we're going to see things move.
Yeah, I agree, and definitely, I think it's not just marketing analytics that is not yet fully embracing the power of like not just having the model estimate things, but also then using that to make decisions. One other interesting thing, which I guess we talked a lot about internally as well, and have been thinking about, is using more causal methods, where we can really, build causal DAGs to represent how we know the context of different marketing channels might interact. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting in terms of implementing just much more logic about how we know the funnel works in terms of like higher up level funnels influencing lower funnels and modeling long-term effects. So yeah, I was curious if you could give us a bit of an overview of your thinking on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes down to this first discussion of attribution versus MMMs. So attribution are very short-term performance marketing. MMMs attempt to give a much more holistic view. Naturally, in their basic sort of format, they will naturally sort of, if you do a short-term channel that influences sales, is going to probably give more weight to them in terms of a short-term sales aspect. But as we know in marketing, there is that full funnel and the full sort of consumer journey to sales. And fundamentally, marketing will interact along that journey. And how do you unpack that into a full holistic model is quite an interesting concept. I think people have tried it in the past, and it's not uncommon to build quite a simple network of models, but I think really beginning to understand the interactions is going to be quite cool and quite significant. And we've got some people working on that already at PyMC-Labs, so I think that'd be something cool to come up in the future.
Yeah, and in a way, I think it makes a lot of sense. As we discussed in the very beginning, there's this multi-touch attribution MTA, because it just makes a lot of sense to really want to know the full customer journey, how they get to your platform and make a sale. But we just so it's not that we don't want to model that, it's just that we can't if we don't have that information, right?
Yeah.
but using those assumptions of that customer journey and then building those assumptions into the model still allows us to estimate something just based on the high level data we have tracking spend and and sales. So yeah, I think that it's really cool that I think it'll be possible to get a lot of those insights back just by making stronger assumptions and building richer models.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess another thing that I thought was really interesting is that idea of combining MMMs with customer lifetime value. So I always thought that like if you're interested in, okay, well, I just want to understand how I acquire customers and what is the customer acquisition cost. That is only half of the equation, right? The other thing I care about is how much is that customer worth? And we definitely know that not every customer is created equally. Some of them churn right away, and some of them might be lifetime customers and they drive a large percentage of our revenue. So incorporating that into the MMM analysis, and then I guess also there's some really interesting insights when combining that then with that business decision making you mentioned. So yeah, do you see any future there, or maybe also just like challenges?
I mean, I think it's quite a cool concept, really, linking in the two frameworks. So there is always that trade-off between focusing on, should your business be focused on customer retention or customer acquisition? And fundamentally, it should be a blend of both. I think I said the other day on the call is, it doesn't matter if you retain as many customers, because if you're not going to acquire any new ones, you're not going to have any customers to keep. So it is cool to link in those two concepts and have a holistic view on that. But what can also be quite interesting, that concept, is translating what is the customer acquisition cost and then understanding that lifetime value of that customer at that point and what they're delivering to the business in the long term. And how you can potentially use marketing to limit, or how many, maybe not just marketing, just different business interventions to limit churn. And so you get a much more holistic long-term picture on the value that you get given to the business. And I think that's a really great aspect of PyMC-Marketing, is it's a nice centralized system that brings in both those different concepts in a single platform, which is great to use.
And then the third thing, I guess, is, and I like the way that you said it, that like, well, there are these different pieces and we're trying to bring those together. So that has in many ways been the vision for PyMC-Marketing and related tools, that you can use those individually to understand customer lifetime value, market attribution, but you can also combine them. And one other piece of the puzzle, which Ben Vincent had made a lot of progress on, is experimentation. And specifically in scenarios where you don't have A/B tests, even though we have some good models for that too in Bayesian modeling, there is the notion of quasi-experimentation. Like if you run, say, a marketing campaign and then you want to measure the impact of that, but you only have the before and after, you don't have a control group. So in those cases, those causal modeling concepts around quasi-experimentation can be very helpful. And there's a package called Causal Pi that we have recently released that does that. I'm going to post it. And yeah, so that basically is another piece of that puzzle, how you can build a very comprehensive marketing analytics solution just using open source technology. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to actually bring all the three components together. So it's an interesting component that I saw from the Bolt post was being able to integrate their causal experiments into the priors within PyMC-Marketing. So, having quite a robust understanding of the causal impact allow them to generate more robust priors. So I think they generally work quite well hand in hand. And I think there's definitely a big space there in the causal market or causal space. I think it's something that's probably I've not seen quite as much, but is definitely growing in popularity quite significantly over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned that bold blog post, because Carlos, who wrote that blog post, is also gonna do a PyMC-Labs webinar with us. I think it's gonna be scheduled for August 2023, and it's not announced yet, but it will be in a couple of days. So make sure to check any of our social media channels, mainly LinkedIn, to get an update for that, and of course the meetup group. That's where it'll be posted. So let's take one more question here from Gautam. On that same point of media interactions, I think that was from when we discussed the different funnel channel interactions. What would be a good way to approach this problem? I've heard about using Bayesian belief network or structural equation models, but would like to hear from your expertise. So I personally have come to the conviction that the best framework to model these things in is using causal structural models. And we've done a lot of work of enabling that in PyMC. It was sort of possible before, but some small things were missing, which are now added. And there's actually a blog post that is going to be released this week on causal modeling in PyMC and the new do operator. So, and there we have as an explicit example the different interactions between media channels. So the particular example there, it's quite a simple one, but it's realistic. You have Google search and the ad spent there, and then you have TV, and that acts as a confounder on the Google because it drives search by itself. And if you don't take that into account, you think that actually Google ad spend is more performant than it actually is. So yeah, check out our blog at the end of this week. By the video, this video will be posted. It's definitely going to be out. So yeah, that I think is a very powerful framework for doing that. And I mean, I guess these other ones too, but yeah, I hadn't personally seen that, but maybe Niall, you have.
Yeah, I mean, I've historically approached it with just structural models, but I think one of the cool things I've seen within PyMC-Labs is more looking at that causal nature and fully understanding the causal interactions between channels and making sure you're not misattributing correlations with causation. And I think that's one really big step forward that we're going to see.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much, Niall, for participating. Thanks so much for our attendees for joining in and asking great questions. And well, with that, I think we're at the end of today's webinar.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.